Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
All right. Welcome again, everyone, to our second episode. Just to give a little bit of context of where we left off last week and where we're kind of going this week, you guys want to just summarize a little bit of the end of chapter 1? And in Tukram's last class, he got to the beginning verses, the first few texts of chapter 2. So what do we need to know right now at this point in the Gita?
So, well, there was a really awesome recap of the first chapter, in which I learned a lot. It was actually a very humbling experience for me personally as a student, because I tend to focus a lot on the details, and it's really helpful to just have a very clear understanding of what's going on and what's necessary to know for somebody that's just jumping in, right? And so as of right now, we're just starting the second chapter. So the first chapter, we have a battle between two groups that are part of the same family. And Arjuna is the soldier that's having to fight a lot of his teachers, family members, and he's having a hard time about it. He's having a panic attack. Physically, his body is just showing symptoms of stress, and he doesn't want to fight. He's confused, although he gives really intelligent reasons why he shouldn't engage in fighting. And he is talking to his charioteer, the driver of his chariot, who's Krishna, about all these reasons, how it's not pious to fight, how fighting and engaging in warfare is gonna lead to the demise of society. It's gonna only bring bad things, and it's not gonna really help in any way, shape, or form himself, his family, other people's families, his nation, and ultimately the world. So at the end of the first chapter, we've just heard and really seen a lot of the character of Arjuna, a very honorable man, full of integrity and respect for his family members, the etiquette attached to that, what's right, what's wrong, and he's just exhibiting that existential crisis. And then in the second chapter, Krishna then jumps in and he starts poking at Arjuna, just to, I think, help him, motivate him to keep letting things out and to keep speaking, but at the same time also to maybe make him feel uncomfortable. And Arjuna finally gets to a point where he literally sits down, breaks down, and asks for help.
And so what do you think about that aspect of poking? Like, I know for me, being new to a tradition with gurus and teachers, and being in that line of succession where you're standing on the shoulders of giants, what's the point of the poking and the, like, to someone who's not familiar with it, they might think that Krishna's being a little antagonistic or
a bully.
Yeah.
So Zuprabhu, would you like to jump in and maybe add to what I have stated or answer?
Definitely. So to continue from where you left and to answer Kim's questions, hopefully, the idea of poking here is that soon we will see Krishna will become the teacher, even though at this point it seems as if Arjuna is the one who is presenting the most intelligent arguments for why not to fight. Nobody wants to fight, right? It's violent, people will die, and it certainly seems to be the wrong thing to do. And so Arjuna seems to be here the wisest of the two, but Krishna will certainly reveal himself as the teacher. And at this point, he's poking holes on Arjuna's arguments. And the reason for that, to answer your question, Kim, I hope, is that the teacher is supposed to make us better. If we are in a situation where we are confused about what we need to do and we need guidance, our teacher will have to demonstrate to us how is it that we can improve. And that will be by showing to us an alternative where you no longer know where to go, your teacher knows where you should go, and therefore he needs to express to you that you've been going in the wrong direction. You need to stop going left, and you now need to start going right. And the only way for a teacher to be able to do that is to say, hey, going left is wrong, because you're going to end up where you don't want to. You're going to get hurt. Bad things are going to happen to you. But you need to go in this other direction. So poking holes in Arjuna's arguments is necessary for Arjuna to understand that, yes, you're not right, you're wrong. And that is the duty of the teacher. The teacher needs to teach you something by telling you what it is that you're doing wrong and how you can get better. Does that explain a little bit? Does that make more sense?
Yeah. It's a concept that I don't think a lot of people are used to, especially in our country, where everything needs to be nice and polite and stay at that love and light kind of don't rock the boat level. So there's definitely value in, if you are looking for sincere growth and development, to bring that humility and surrender to someone who can guide you. So I've been really impressed with just Arjuna's, like, he's a warrior, like a strong warrior, but yet he reaches this place of submission and humility on that battlefield. You mentioned a quote that you were moved by in the second chapter today.
Yes, this is chapter 2, text 7. It reads, this is Arjuna speaking. Now I am confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. Right? So this is a text that deeply teaches me a lot because in the first episode, we spoke how Bhagavad Gita is a small part actually of the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata really is the text that we would get familiar with how magnanimous these characters are, such as Arjuna. Just to speak briefly about him, Arjuna's father isn't even from earth. This is Indra. Indra is the king of heavens who impregnated his mother, Kunti. So he has, in one sense, this transcendental birth. This bowl that was slipping from his hands that he could no longer hold was actually not even from this planet, from the heavenly kingdoms. He actually goes there to heavenly dimensions to learn how to fight, to learn how to become a warrior. This is an extraordinary personality. It's definitely not an ordinary person here. And yet he's getting to a point where he's confessing that he's confused about his duty and that he needs somebody who knows more than he knows to guide him. And it is absolutely necessary in our spiritual life to develop that kind of humility, because that is what our guru is going to do for us. That guru is going to teach us. And unless we are receptive to that teaching, we won't hear it. So Arjuna, as magnanimous as he is, understanding this point and saying, I am now your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you, please instruct me. It is certainly a point that all of us that are sincere about making progress in our spiritual life should know and should get to that point.
Yeah, Varanga, you were saying the same things, like what it's like to be under the guidance of a guru.
Yeah, I think that when we hear about, the role of a teacher, and especially in spiritual life, I agree with you, Kim. I think that this could be something that is a lot of people would feel uncomfortable with, especially because that concept of I have my own truth, I have my own light, and I respect your truth, and we don't have to get weird and have to follow a certain path, and it really just I think we're missing the point, and I think it's something that we actually have even in our material lives. I mean, if you want to become a doctor, an engineer, anything that requires a lot of studying and practice, and you don't reinvent the wheel from zero. You enroll. First of all, you have to apply to get into a college, and then a bunch of people vet your application, see if you're worthy of entering their school. Then once you apply and you get accepted, then you start going to classes. That doesn't mean you get an A and you become a doctor right away. No, it just means that now you have been accepted to then practice or be a part of this process. Then you go to class, you follow a teacher, what they say, what they teach. You have a little bit of faith that what they're teaching you, that they're qualified to teach you, right? And then you start learning, and then you have to pass exams. And so this process is very rigorous, and it requires a lot of sincerity and a lot of effort and money and time. And at the end of many years of doing that, then if you pass the state exams and all these things, then you can become board certified and then go out on the field and start working as a doctor, for example. Now, why is it so hard? And this is really where the question that I've had is, well, why is it so hard to be okay with that? For society to be like, yes, good job. For parents to be like, my son and daughter are lawyers or doctors or engineers or whatever. That's like a really great source of pride. But when somebody says, well, I want to seek truth, I want to see God, I want to spend the rest of my life studying this, and I want to have a teacher that can lead me through this process. Why is it that we're uncomfortable with that as a society? Why is it that we don't give it at least the same level of respect and value that we would give to something material that really doesn't, I mean, it means something, but on a material level, right? So I think that if we think about what is normal in our society, we could then easily transfer those same sentiments or perspective into spiritual life and be a little more open. Oh yeah, well, if somebody actually wants to progress in spiritual life, it only makes sense that that person would be open to looking for help, asking, spending time and effort in finding a teacher, and then serving that teacher so the teacher can give some knowledge. That's not illogical. It actually is very easy to understand that concept. I think the point is the fact that we think that we know it all spiritually, like, oh, well, I don't need to hear that, or that we're just not ready to make some sacrifices for a spiritual quest because maybe we actually don't think spirituality matters that much. And that's a hard pill to swallow. I think that's like, and our teacher, Tukram Prabhu, brings this point up. We're actually closet atheists. We actually don't think that that's that valuable, or that God is really deserves a little more energy than everything else that we do put our energy towards. And so I wanted to talk about this because I think that if we do use what we are used to and what we do accept as super valuable in our material environment and lives, then it would be easy to transfer the same thing to a spiritual situation. But the only thing that we would have to also believe is that spirituality is at least as equally important, if not the most important, because that's who we truly are. But we wouldn't be able to know that until we have been trained a little bit, or received some knowledge to the fact of who we actually are as spiritual beings, right? So it makes sense if we think that we are material, that we would spend all our time and effort building that only. But once we get some knowledge that we are not this body, or this isn't all there is to do, then naturally that person will be a little more inquisitive to say, well, if I'm not this body and I'm a spiritual being, then it would make sense to find somebody that would help me understand how I can nurture myself as a spiritual being. So I hope that also helps somewhat in answering that question.
Yeah, I like your points about if you want to become a doctor or a lawyer, you put in the time, you put in the discipline, and that's what serious spiritual practice, my impression of it is it's a spiritual discipline. Like, it takes work. And yeah, and I remember when I first read this part of the Gita, I was thinking, oh, well, Arjuna knew Krishna was God, so of course he's going to listen to him. But it was interesting to me to learn that, no, he didn't know that Krishna was God. He was his best friend, his companion. And I thought it was so interesting in the first chapter where he was given that option of, do you want Krishna to be your charioteer with you in the chariot, or do you want his army? And he chose Krishna. Like, that to me was amazing.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to one point about the value system that our society currently gives us. I once read a quote by Prabhupada saying that devotees are expert at thinking through things, understanding where a particular path ends, where currently in our material society, you are supposed to go to university and you get a degree, and hopefully that will qualify you to get a job, and then you get a job, and then you climb up, and then you start a family, and then you attain all these material possessions, your home, your car, etc. You send your kids to schools and so on. This is, for a large number of people, considered to be a successful life. But then you retire, and then what do you have? You have essentially a little bit of money that hopefully can guide you through, put you through your old age, but essentially you're presently, we can actually verify it with data from social scientists, that you are actually going to be left with a lot of medication to buy to cure your diseases related to all the stress it took you, the 70 plus years to attain all this material stuff. And then you don't really have an alternative lifestyle, where most people think, well, once I retire, I'm going to move to this other place and I'm going to do these other things. Like, no, you won't, because you're going to continue to do the exact same things you were doing before, because that's all you have. I worked at such an institution in the past where people dreamed of 40 years from now, I will be retired and I will never come back here and I will go to the beach and so on. And then 3 months later, they start coming by again to have lunch with their old friends, and then they come by more and more often, and then they're coming back every day, because you don't really have an alternative. You don't have anything else to do except to face our ultimate fate, which is death. And that's really where it ends. There's nothing else that our material society can offer us at the end of that so-called glorious material journey. There is nothing that they can give you. So Prabhupada was mentioning that a devotee would think, well, but if I am eternal, if I am actually a spiritual being and I am eternal, then that's not the end of my existence. Where do I go from there? So if we start thinking that way, yes, the material goals are still there, and most of them are noble, could be noble, but it is not everything. And like we were discussing before, if we are willing to spend so much time and effort to attain these material things, then what to speak of developing our spiritual life? The same sincerity, the same humility, the same willingness to perform austerities, willing to sacrifice to attain this spiritual evolution should be there, but currently it's not. And most people then would take that topic very lightly. Well, yeah, it is my truth. It's whatever I believe is, and there's no book that would teach me anything. I don't like organized religion and so on. And those, then it becomes very secondary, tertiary. You know, it's not so viable. And then it's very easy to say, yeah, I don't need anybody. I have my own truth, because this is really not in the forefront of our value system.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me what motivates people to a deeper spiritual practice or to seeking God. And a lot of times, as like Tukaram Prabhu pointed out, the whole existential crisis, it's losing a job or being homeless or having a terminal disease, and then people start to think about these things. But the points that you just made of, okay, you're pursuing all these things in your life, and what do you do when you're 70 or 80? And why not think about those things now when you're healthy?
There's nothing else that our current material society will give you after that. It will be like a retirement paycheck, which again, unfortunately, the honest reality of today is that most of that retirement money will be spent on your medication anyways, for you to fight against all your bad eating habits and everything, all this stress that you had to endure during your material existence. And then there's nothing else. There's nothing else in our material society will offer.
I think you touched on a really good point that reminded me of something else, which is, well, a lot of people think, and I certainly think this way as well. This is my plan for right now. So, I'm gonna get married. We're gonna have family, and at this time, then I want to do this and that, and then later, then I'll retire and just like travel or whatever retirement looks like for certain people, right? But the reality is, and we learned this from the ancient Bhakti Yoga text, that whatever, and Krishna mentions this in the Gita too, that whatever we spend time practicing, right, and cultivating, that's the mentality we're going to have at the end of our life. And so it's quite naive to think that we spend a whole lifetime doing something fully just for our material benefit, right, for satisfying the body, and to an extent, to a greater extent, our family members and nation and whatever else that we identify with. And then that at the end of our life, we're going to completely just become transcendental and a self-realized person, when we haven't really practiced that. And so I find that to be such an awakening and sobering concept, that actually what I choose to do on a daily basis, that's what I'm training my mind to remember. That's what I'm training my body and my mind to be okay with. And so hopefully, if it's something that we've been practicing throughout life, at every stage of life, even if we started when we're super young or in our 20s, 50s, whatever, but at least that we're doing a daily practice, that it will become easier to remember God, or even just these higher principles, when our body starts breaking down, when our family members start leaving us, when we have a pandemic and we can't go outside. So many people right now, like, their lives are crumbling because they had all these plans, and then life happened. Like, we have to stay home, we can't go out, so if you've based and you've built this life of illusion, putting all our energies into this basket, when something happens that's out of our control, then what else is there? And then we see depression, suicide, so many things, and it's quite easy to blame others, or to a greater extent God, like, why would God do this? But then we don't really realize that, oh, this is what we've been cultivating. These are the reactions to the actions that we've been taking for an extended period of time. And so you really, your comments reminded me of this point of how it's kind of crazy to think that we're going to have a different outcome when we've spent so much time cultivating these materialistic and superficial practices.
And besides, at that time, like you mentioned, depression, Alzheimer, Parkinson's, and all kinds of other stresses will prevent us from being able to really spend the best time of our intelligence understanding. At that time, it's not necessarily too late, but again, if we hadn't had that lifestyle, it would be certainly more difficult to comprehend spiritual truth at that point in time than it would be at our prime, at the time that one is supposed to be at a university, let's say a young adult. And if you cultivate a lot of your mind, a lot of your intelligence in spiritual topics, at that point in time, we can very much easier take those teachings and that wisdom with us to our older age. And something else I'm thinking now is how wonderful Bhagavad Gita is all the way, because in the first chapters, it seems, well, it is done by design, that the beginning of the Gita also reflects the beginning of our spiritual lives, where, like we are discussing right here, right now, Arjuna has to get to the point where he truly surrenders. I don't know everything. I need a teacher who knows. Please instruct me. I am surrendering unto you. And the impetus of that was finding himself in a position where things were really difficult and he didn't know what to do. And I think to various degrees, we all have found ourselves struggling in life. And that's most of the times where we tend to look into, why am I suffering? Is there an alternative? Is there somebody who can help me? Is there somebody who knows more than I do? So the beginning of Bhagavad Gita reflects precisely the beginning of one's spiritual journey as well.
Yeah, what really attracted me to this tradition consistently has been Tukaram Prabhu's teachings about grace and mercy. And he had a great quote from last night's class of, if you want wisdom and grace, you have to seek it. You have to receive it. Where we think we're the doer all the time. Like, oh, I need to do this. I need to do that. Okay, spiritual stuff. Okay, I need to do this. And like, there's a whole nother element of like a piece of the pie that's God's grace and mercy, that we don't have to deserve it. Like, he just wants to give it to us. And Veronica, you had a great question about mercy. I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so well, I guess this is a good opportunity to, I wanted to touch on something that Sosa Prabhu had brought up, and also tied into this concept and of mercy that you just brought up, Kim. So surrender, it's such a scary word. Definitely for me, it's like, I don't know, but it is also an important component of our spiritual life, like you mentioned today. So I think a question that a lot of people may have, that I certainly had at the beginning, was, well, is it a prerequisite to be surrendered in order to start? Certainly, I experienced in my life before coming to this tradition that I had to just have no doubts. I had to go in 100% in faith and accept everything that the priests were saying, or everything that the certain spiritual texts were saying, without doubting or questioning. And it was actually something bad to question. And so this concept of surrender became such a scary concept and taboo, because externally you had to be like, yes, I believe, but internally it's like, I don't know, like, I just met you guys, like, I don't know God, I've never seen him, so help me get started. So it was kind of like you don't know anything about basketball, and then you're thrown into an NBA game, so it's like so scary. So one of the points that I wanted to bring up about surrender is when Arjuna at this point in the Gita is asking Krishna, well, please help me. Yes, that is surrender, but it's like surrender with lowercase s, right? At least he's open or receptive. He's opening that door for Krishna to come in and help him, give him some advice, because they have a relationship. Krishna can help him. And obviously at this point, it hasn't been established that Krishna is the divine, but from what we know about the Gita, for somebody that doesn't know that, it's like somebody that cares deeply about Arjuna, knows Arjuna. And so he's going to start giving him advice according to him, to who he is, what he can take, what he's ready to receive, which is a nice link into this concept of mercy. So Tukaram Prabhu was explaining yesterday how it's so important for us to not lie when we're in our spiritual paths, saying, oh yeah, well, I just came across this tradition and it was just like that I just became interested and took on everything, and I just was a believer. And although, you know, that sounds cool and nice, because to a certain extent we're all addicted to that like fantastic description of the beginning of our spiritual lives, it's not as honest as to really admit that there is a lot of work that needs to be put in, just like in material life, like I had mentioned before, and like you have both mentioned before. And so the concept of mercy is something that I had a question, because I thought, at least in my personal life, I definitely feel like I needed to have gotten some mercy to get started on this journey. Like, yeah, I wanted to know a little bit, but to have had the transformations that I've had, to have had a lot of changes. And of course, this is not to say that I still don't have a long way to go, because I do, but just thinking back just a few years, even just a year ago, I've definitely seen a lot of growth, and it's hard for me to take credit for that 100%. So right now, after 10 years of working on this process, mercy still a huge part of my process and will forever be. But my question was, well, is it just like it's up to the person to get started, and then later on, after a lot of sincerity and work and determination, then God opens the floodgates of mercy? Because that hasn't really been my experience. It's been like I get a little bit of mercy, and then I started my path making changes with the guidance of my teachers, and then a lot of more mercy kept pouring in. And yeah, he pointed to the fact that one of our great teachers, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, says that faith comes, it's the result of Mahat Kripa, which is great mercy from a devotee, and then also Mahat Seva, great service to that devotee. So we can't get to God on our own, and meaning like we can't get love from God directly, because only somebody that has love of God can give it to us, and that's the devotees. And so you get faith by getting mercy from somebody that has that love that you want, and then through service, it's like a way to reciprocate, to try to repay that unpayable debt, right? And then through that combination, then your faith grows. But there has to be initial faith, enough to step into the lab, like Kim had mentioned it initially. So we have to have a little bit of faith to walk into this process and want to try it out. And I think that really requires mercy. And then it's not like you just sit back and relax, like you watch TV, like you turn the TV on and then you let the movie play. No, you do your part. And that's the big point that Tukram was making last night. You have to put in the time. You have to be receptive. We have to be sincere. And sincerity really means that we are going to let our teachers come in and do surgery. But they won't do that unless we open that door, which is really points to the fact that our free will is so important, that nobody can infringe upon that. We have the free will to choose. And therefore, mercy becomes, it's something that's constantly flowing, because God is all good. He wants to help us and he can help us, but he respects our free will. And so we need to be open to receiving it. And although that mercy is always flowing, that doesn't mean that we're always going to be able to hold it, right? And that's where our work comes into play. If we're doing our work, if we're working through our hangups and traumas and triggers and things like that, that mercy is still flowing, but we're going to be able to receive it in a much deeper way the deeper we go into our practice. And so I wanted to share a little bit about that. Thank you for the opportunity. So do you guys have any, maybe your own experiences with surrender and mercy that you've seen in your lives or in your own path?
I can recall a conversation I had with the very first devotee I met in my life, Shastakrit Prabhu, who in our very, I would say, early conversations, perhaps this was like the second or the third time I was speaking with him, and he was telling me about his teacher, his guru. And he made a point which I couldn't understand. He said, yeah, I have him tell me what to do in my life, and I do it. Isn't that amazing? And I was bewildered as I, no, like you're telling me that you have somebody tell you what to do, that like you don't have any freedom, you don't have any free will. And how is that amazing? That was quite of a bewildering point to me. But that's the extent to which he was surrendered. You know, he was surrendered to the teacher, and he had faith in the bona fide teacher that was guiding him through a spiritual path to a better place. And he was completely surrendered to that, knowing and having faith in his teacher, that his teacher not only was bona fide, but cared for him deeply. And in one sense was designing his life for him. And he was expressing to me how easy, how grateful he was, because all he had to do to become the best version of himself is to follow the path that his teacher has carved for him. So that concept of surrender to me was tricky to understand at that point. He had it, I didn't. And to me, Varangi Mataji, to explain to you my experience with surrender is certainly related to chanting, because it took me about 5 years to start taking chanting seriously. And all kinds of counter arguments I had in my mind that, well, I don't really need to chant my 16 rounds. I can chant 8 and be okay. Or I'm not going to do like everybody else. They're chanting, but they're not focused. They get 16 rounds done, but they're not really meditating. So I rather just do my 4, which is really good quality and so on. So for years, and 1 year after another year, it was just a struggle with chanting, like we were discussing earlier, taking our spiritual practice seriously, understanding that this is actually the most valuable thing there is. And just making that commitment, surrendering to the fact that I am a spiritual being and I need to engage in a spiritual practice if I am to reawaken my spiritual identity. And then just surrendering to chanting. And to me, it was a very extraordinary experience, because I realized that all the drama that surrounded my mind around chanting, all the reasons why I can't do it or why I won't do it, was just a bunch of phantasmagoria. They weren't even real. They didn't exist. I don't know where that came from, that prevented me from chanting. Because once I was determined, once I actually made up my mind, no, I am going to chant no matter what. That is my priority number 1. I'm going to do it. It not only became easy, but it became pleasurable. It is something that now, if I don't do it, I mean, I do it every time, but if it's getting like around 11:30 in the morning and I haven't done at least 12 rounds yet, I already start feeling super antsy, where nothing else matters. It could even be business, you know, or any other so-called material priorities. I can't even focus on them because I'm super distracted by the point that I haven't even gotten to at least 12 rounds, you know? And to me, I think that was my experience with surrender, surrendering to chanting, and then having this mercy that now I enjoy it. It's fantastic. I can't see myself without it. I wouldn't trust myself without it. I wouldn't trust that I wouldn't know how to think clearly, how to take the right path, how to make the right choices without chanting on a daily basis. But I think it did require that surrender. I'm going to surrender to this. It is, yes, it's an hour and 45 minutes or so, but I'm going to do it. And I'm going to surrender to this. And then how transformative that was, you know, and I think that's the part of mercy where it's not even hard, you know, like I know I said this already, but for so many years, there were so many reasons why I shouldn't do it. It's such a struggle. And they were not even real, because it's actually very pleasant. It's actually, not only from a spiritual, but even from a material point of view, it's very calming. It makes you sober. It makes you actually understand what your enemies are: lust, hate, greed, anger, as opposed to them, the other race or the other nation and so on, which we're so confused thinking that that's our enemies. It really allows us to see things as they are. So I think that's a part of the mercy that came through that surrender.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, both of you. It helps. It's always inspiring to hear that, oh, it's not always so easy for senior devotees or people who have been around for so long. Like for me, I fell into that whole trap of, you need to be so independent in life, or maybe I just decided I need to be so independent in life, and financially, mentally, emotionally, I don't need anybody. And so chanting was one of the easiest things for me because it was a solitary activity. I could do it alone. It was a time when I went to 16 rounds was a time when I did not have really any friends or community to rely on. And so it was like Krishna was my friend. I felt like the only friend in my corner. And so the challenging part for me was surrendering to a community, surrendering to the love of devotees who wanted to be my friends, surrendering to a spiritual teacher who wanted to help me. Like that part was most challenging for me. And so that's kind of what I've been working on.
One more point I'd like to make is, Varangi, you mentioned earlier that surrender is such a scary word. And it is, especially in our Western capitalistic society. We don't want to surrender, we want to conquer. And it is very much so of a scary concept. However, one of the things that really attracts me to the path of Krishna consciousness, to the path of Bhagavad Gita, is the sober scientific way of looking at things. We are extremely small. We are known as infinitesimal. And when I say we, I mean the soul, this part of spiritual consciousness that is within this material body, who is our true identity. The Vedas describes us as being infinitesimal. And a way to grasp what that means, Srila Prabhupada mentioned, if you take the tip of your hair and you divide that by 1,000, so 1/1000th of the tip of your hair is approximately, just like as an analogy, because actually the soul would be even smaller than that, but is approximately the size of the soul, who we are. Now let's keep that in mind for a moment, and let's shift to something which I believe at one point or another, anybody who is listening to this podcast anyway, has already done, which is going on YouTube and just putting, like, look up the size of the universe video, where you get these comparisons, where you get planet Earth, and then you get Jupiter, and then you get the sun, and then you get a bigger sun, and then you get the galaxy, and then you get the other bigger galaxy, and then you get a constellation of galaxies, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, to a mind-boggling measurement that we can't even grasp how ginormous this universe in which we find ourselves really is. And then if we can even extend that, it's supposed to be one universe out of infinite other universes, and that this universe that we live in is actually a pretty tiny one. According to the Vedas, that other universes out there are even much bigger than this current universe we find ourselves in. So now let's try to put these two concepts together. We are infinitesimal, infinitely small, a tiny spark of spiritual consciousness that is infinitely small, currently finding ourselves in this infinite material creation that is the cosmos, this universe, which is tremendously big. We don't even know how big it is. And how do we get out? How can we possibly think that us being such tiny spark of spiritual consciousness are going to be able to transcend all of this material existence in which we find ourselves without mercy? So the way for us to get out is really to surrender to something that must be extremely powerful in order to get us out of here, in order to take us back to the spiritual world, which is where we came from. I think part of what we were discussing earlier, why don't we take spirituality serious nowadays? Because there's a lack of definition. What does it mean to be spiritual? Well, it means that we are not material, and that the entire universe in which we find ourselves is something that we need to get out, and we need to go back to this spiritual world. That it is necessary to understand that point. We are spiritual beings, therefore we are not supposed to be here. This is not our home. And since we are so tiny and the universe is so gigantic that we can't even comprehend, how do we get out? The mercy that we necessitate must be coming from something much greater than us. And the only way to attain it is to surrender to it. And then we can get out. Otherwise, we're stuck here.
Thank you. That was such a good point. Yeah, that definitely puts stuff into perspective, right? And I think the concept of mercy is it's hard to say that it's equally as important as the effort that we put in. It's obviously way more important, but it is it also necessitates our doing. And this is linking to something that reminded me that I was reminded of while you were speaking, which was, why, if that's the case, if all of us are spiritual beings, if we're not meant to be here, then how come everybody doesn't get out? Or how come people that come across this book, you know, the Bhagavad Gita, or any other spiritual texts that have so much wisdom and it's so logical and it's like, yeah, it makes sense. How come everybody's not running for that? How come everybody's not chanting? How come everybody's not enrolling in this course of how to get out of this material existence? And I know this is a question that came up in my process when I would hear that explanation of, well, we're not meant to be here, this is not our home. It's like, well, why am I so attached to it? Why do I feel so happy with my family and doing the things that I like and all these things? And one of our, you know, our teachers explain that in order for us to take up its spiritual life seriously, we have to have been burnt out with materialism to a certain extent. Not completely surrendered to spirituality, right? But at least we must have been hurting, suffering to some extent, and must have at least realized that this isn't where we need to be. So somebody that's still fully thinking or in the illusion that I'm happy, I'm great, I don't need help, like I can do it on my own, is it's really, it doesn't matter how much somebody shows to them, or it doesn't matter how much he reads or encounters, he or she is not going to be open to starting on this path, because there's still that unrealistic, I guess, identification with this world. Like, yeah, I'm at home, I'm good here, I don't need anything else. And this explanation was simultaneous, like it was sweet, because it's like, yeah, I definitely feel like I've suffered enough to realize that I'm not from here. But also it was really hard because I realized how much I actually thought I was happy, and like how that didn't really mean anything because I wasn't making progress in the right way, and how most of the world is actually under that illusion that this is my home. The purpose of my life is to make as much money as possible, or the purpose of my life, maybe that's such a gross, and gross by saying gross, I mean like such a obvious example. So let's pick something that's less obvious. The purpose of life is to build hospitals for the whole world. You know, that sounds so like heroic and auspicious and things like that. But really that doesn't resolve the main issues in life. How to not die, how to not be born in a material body, how to not get sick, how to not get old, and how to not die, right? And so seeing how so many people put so much effort into building a life of, you know, philanthropic stuff, but really ignoring the big white elephant in the room, it's quite sad. I was listening to a class by my guru, His Holiness Devamrita Swami, just a few nights ago. And I had a question. I was asking him, why is it like, is something wrong with me? Because I feel like with this whole pandemic thing that we can't ignore, this is something that everybody's going through. I kind of feel a little happy being at home and like just focusing on other things that give me stability, like my spiritual life. And obviously that's not always the case. I'm also very attracted to do things that are not very helpful for my material life, but I have been more inclined to do spiritual practice since I'm at home. And so how do I protect myself from not becoming calloused to other people? And his answer was so brilliant. He was saying, a spiritualist definitely feels bad for the pain of other people, right? But he or she feels even worse about seeing how attached they are to their material identity and to how much they don't want to give that up. That's actually something that really troubles the spiritualist, because he or she can understand, no, it's not about being healthy and not getting the coronavirus and all being good so we can continue satisfying our bodies. It's like we should feel bad for people that are not yet aware of the fact that there's actually, that they are meant for something bigger. And like you said, we're tiny, but we think we're like the center of the universe. And that misconception really closes the door to truth and to being helped. And so what we see here Arjuna doing is, and Kim brought it up, he's so exalted and he's so qualified and he's just like the perfect human being, right? Like I want to be like him. And I want to feel the way he feels, that compassion for people. But at the same time, we see how humble he is, right? He's opening up and asking for help. And that's something so virtuous, and somebody that can materially have so much and still be humble enough to be like, yeah, those things mean nothing if I'm not connected to divinity. It's like the greatest wealth, right? And that's something that we can only get through a process where we are getting personalized mentorship by somebody that has walked that path and has seen that light and is 100% convinced that that's the way out. There's no other way. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you, Parangi. I hate to do this because I feel we could go for hours, which would be great. But we are nearing the end of our time. Do either of you want to just close out with some ending reflections, or?
I think where we are in Bhagavad Gita right now, beginning of chapter 2, and Arjuna saying, I am surrendered unto you, instruct me. It's something that if one is seeking to start a bona fide spiritual path, that's a point that we have to get to. We have to get to a point where, and this is going to come up in Bhagavad Gita itself. In the later chapters, Krishna is going to say that you need to approach a bona fide spiritual master because they have seen the truth and they can teach you. And that is an absolute necessary point. And happy, or not happy, but fortunate will be he who finds such a teacher. And even more fortunate is if that person will become a real student as well. So I think that's my reflection too. And that's why our tremendous gratitude for Srila Prabhupada, who started this whole movement here in the West. The amount of mercy he brought to us all here is tremendous. So we are so fortunate to have had him start this, and then personalities such as Varangi mentioned, Devamrita Swami and Tukaram Prabhu, who are continuing this path. So we are fortunate to have such teachers, and even more fortunate we will be if we become real students as well.
Thank you. Very well said. All right. Well, thank you both. It's been a pleasure, and I'm excited to talk again next week. And I'll see you at class later.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for joining us on Simple Living, High Thinking. Please subscribe as new episodes post every Monday. You can tune into this podcast live every Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Check out our website for more details at simplelivinghighThinking.net. And if you would like to nominate someone for a devotee spotlight interview, contact us via our website at simplelivinghighThinking.net.